Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Arnett. Today, I'm excited to share some research with you that I'm doing in collaboration with my amazing doctoral students, Serenity Lee, Kiana Richards, and Pat Hewlin. So the focus of the talk today is on hidden challenges of minority, racial, and ethnic identity management at work. And so we're trying to address a common dilemma that I think many in this room have also examined, which is how do you navigate a minority, racial, or ethnic identity at work? And when we think about this, we tend to think about this as occurring on one of two ends of a continuum. On one end, you have high manifestation, which is proactively bringing attention to your identity at work. And on the other end, you have suppression, which is going out of your way to actively withhold or downplay things related to your identity. And one of the ways that we're looking to build on this work is to say that maybe rather than these being two ends of the same continuum, they're actually two distinct dimensions of manifestation and suppression. We show this through confirmatory factor analysis, but we also show this by looking at the unique antecedents that precede these different types of identity management strategies. So manifestation is preceded by perceptions that bring attention to your identity has benefits, such as the ability to feel authentic or enact social change, whereas suppression is preceded by perceptions of risk, such as stigma and norm violation. But where we really see ourselves contributing and showing the value of these two distinct dimensions is by examining the consequences. So past work has shown that suppression, and we find as well in our research that suppression is associated with greater emotional burden and likelihood of leaving one's organization. And manifestation is usually thought of as sort of a panacea to these issues. It can decrease emotional burden, increase well-being, and therefore by increased job commitment. But we're going to be looking at in this research the possibility that sometimes manifesting your identity actually increases emotional burden and the propensity to leave. And we're particularly going to look at this in under a certain circumstance by interacting manifestation and suppression. So what we're hypothesizing here is that for people who feel a strong need to suppress their identity, at least on some occasions, higher levels of manifestation will actually further exacerbate emotional burden and turnover. And so what this looks like is that the highest emotional burden and propensity for turnover occurs among people who vacillate back and forth between manifestation and suppression depending on the scenario. And as an example from our data, this is a woman who talks about how her company has a history of retaliation and discrimination against women of color, so she doesn't feel like she can bring attention to her identity in the workplace among upper administration. But among students of color that she's trying to make feel welcome, she feels like she can really talk about her experiences. And so we find support for these hypotheses across a few studies. I'll just show two today. But what we essentially find is a similar pattern where among people who don't really feel a need to suppress very much, manifestation is either unrelated to or negatively related to emotional exhaustion or other forms of emotional burden. But among people who feel the need to suppress at least sometimes, greater manifestation actually leads to more emotional exhaustion, such that the people who are most exhausted are those who vacillate back and forth between manifestation and suppression depending on the scenario. In a longitudinal study that we just finished data collection on this week, we also find that the people who vacillate back and forth are the most anxious, the most stressed, and the ones who feel most ambivalent. And we find through moderated mediation that these emotional burdens do contribute to a greater propensity to leave one's organization. And so what does this mean for organizations? Well, to understand what do we do about all this, we have to go back to these antecedents. What is the source and root of this issue? A lot of organizations today are increasingly trying to encourage people to see the benefits of bringing their authentic selves to work, or are trying to enact social change but don't really know how to do it, and so they're enlisting the help of racial and ethnic minorities to figure out how to be more effective. All of these are encouraging people to bring their identities to work by highlighting the benefits of doing so. But what we're trying to say in this research is that highlighting benefits is actually not the same as mitigating the risk of doing so. And so long as organizations are constantly bringing attention to these benefits and not actually addressing the risk of bringing attention to your identity in the workplace, they're actually just making a more uncomfortable situation potentially for racial and ethnic minority employees, wherein they feel constantly uncertain about what is acceptable, vacillating back and forth between the situation and exhausting themselves in the process. And then as a result, wondering whether it's even worthwhile to be in these organizations in the first place. Thank you.